Gemini said deep within the steel belly of the USS Gerald R. 300 miles from the nearest coastline and surrounded by the pitch-black void of the Atlantic Ocean at night, a transaction is taking place that is just as critical to national security as the loading of a missile. A 25-year-old pilot, strapped into an F-35C Lightning II, is preparing to launch off the deck into a combat zone. The jet is fueled with 20,000 pounds of highly volatile JP-5 aviation kerosene. The weapon bays are loaded with precision-guided munitions. The nuclear reactor, a marvel of modern physics, is humming deep below the waterline, generating enough electricity to power a medium-sized city. But none of this billion-dollar machinery matters if the pilot's blood sugar crashes halfway through the mission. Before that pilot climbed into the cockpit, he visited a room deep inside the ship that is just as critical as the weapon's magazine. He ate a meal that was planned 3 weeks ago, sourced from a massive logistics hub in Bahrain, flown in by helicopter, and cooked by a 19-year-old specialist fighting seasickness in a galley that gets hotter than the engine room. An aircraft carrier is often called a floating city, but in reality, it is a floating stomach. It consumes roughly $65,000 worth of food every single day. It burns through 3,000 pounds of chicken wings in a single dinner service. And if the food stops, the war stops. While the missiles and radars get all the glory, the culinary specialists are the ones fighting a relentless 24-hour battle against spoilage, shortages, and the voracious appetites of 5,000 exhausted sailors. This is the story of the industrial gut of the American Navy. A logistical machine that turns flour, water, and frozen meat into the biological fuel that powers the most formidable military force on Earth. To understand the sheer scale of the problem, one must look at the mathematics of survival at sea. The basic daily food allowance is a specific dollar figure set by the government, fluctuating around $12 to $14 per sailor per day. That is the entire budget. For less than the price of a single fast food combo meal, the Navy has to provide 3 nutritionally balanced meals plus a midnight ration to a crew that is working 18-hour days in physically demanding conditions. On a Nimitz or Ford-class carrier, you have roughly 4,500 to 5,000 personnel on board. Do the math, and you are looking at a daily grocery bill that rivals the budget of a small municipality. But unlike a restaurant, you cannot just call a supplier when you run out of eggs. The ship is nuclear-powered. It can sail for 25 years without refueling its reactors. But the crew is biological. They run out of fuel in 4 hours. This means the single biggest limiting factor on an aircraft carrier's endurance isn't uranium or jet fuel. It is lettuce, milk, and coffee. The journey of a steak from a farm in Nebraska to a plastic tray in the South China Sea is a masterpiece of global logistics. It starts with the Prime Vendor Program, a massive contracting network that routes food to Navy warehouses globally. But getting it to the ship is the most dangerous part of the process. This is the underway replenishment, or UNREP. It is one of the most dangerous maneuvers in the Navy, a high-stakes dance of physics and seamanship. The carrier pulls alongside a massive supply ship like the USNS Supply. They steam side by side at 12 to 15 knots, separated by only 150 feet of rushing water. If the helmsman makes a mistake, the ships collide, crushing steel and bone. Pneumatic guns shoot shot lines across the gap. Heavy steel cables are tensioned between the ships. Then the pallets start flying. We are not talking about a few boxes of groceries. We are talking about 500 to 800 pallets of dry goods, frozen meats, and fresh produce transferred in a matter of hours. Helicopters join the fray, the MH-60 Seahawks lifting heavy nets of cargo from the supply ship and dropping them onto the carrier's flight deck while the ship pitches and rolls. It is a ballet of industrial violence. The priority during an UNREP is ruthless. Fresh vegetables and cool cargo must be moved below decks instantly. In the Persian Gulf, where deck temperatures can hit 130 degrees Fahrenheit, a pallet of milk will spoil in minutes if left out in the sun. This triggers the formation of a working party. Hundreds of sailors, drawn from every department on the ship, form a human chain. They pass boxes hand-to-hand down ladders through narrow passageways and into the deep freeze lockers. It is backbreaking manual labor, and every sailor, regardless of rank, dreads the call for a working party. It is a reminder that despite all the high-tech automation, the Navy still runs on muscle. Once the food is on board, it enters the domain of the galleys. A carrier doesn't just have one kitchen, it has 5 to 7 depending on the class of the ship. The main aft galley and forward galley feed the enlisted crew. The environment here is brutal. The industrial ovens, the deep fat fryers, and the steam kettles, massive cauldrons that can cook 50 gallons of soup at once, generate immense heat. The ventilation systems struggle to keep up, and the temperature often exceeds 100 degrees. The floor is often slick with grease and water despite constant scrubbing. The equipment is industrial grade. We are talking about the Niagara dishwasher, a conveyor belt beast that blasts thousands of trays with scalding water every hour. The dough mixers are the size of cement trucks, and everything is bolted to the deck. When the ship hits a storm and rolls 20 degrees, the soup in the kettles sloshes violently. The bakers have to brace themselves against the tables to keep from falling, but the cooking cannot stop. The recipe cards are standardized by the Armed Forces Recipe Service. They don't list ingredients in cups or tablespoons, they list them in pounds. Take 50 pounds of butter, add 20 pounds of diced onions. If a cook messes up the math, 500 people go hungry. Food on a carrier is also a study in class warfare. At the bottom of the hierarchy, you have the general mess. This is where the enlisted sailors eat. You grab a plastic tray, you stand in line, sometimes for 30 minutes or more, snaking through the passageways. You get served hot chow by a culinary specialist behind a glass sneeze guard. You find a seat at a cramped metal table, eat fast, and get out to make room for the next shift. The food here is hearty, high-calorie, and aimed at mass satisfaction. It is quantity over nuance. One step up is the chief's mess. This is the exclusive dining area for E7s and above. The food is often the same as the general mess, but the atmosphere is radically different. It is a club. They have better coffee. They have their own cooks who might make custom omelets. It is a sanctuary where the senior enlisted leaders solve the ship's problems over breakfast without officers or junior sailors listening. Then you have the wardroom. This is for the officers. Here the world changes. There are tablecloths, there is silverware. Junior officers are often tasked with inspecting the food before it is served to the commander. The culinary specialists who work here are often the best on the ship, hand-picked for their skill. The presentation matters. And at the very top is the flag mess. This is a private dining room for the admiral and his staff. They have personal chefs. The admiral might be hosting foreign dignitaries, so the food here must be restaurant quality. It creates a strange dynamic where the 19-year-old kid scrubbing the flight deck is eating a sloppy Joe, while the admiral is eating a perfectly plated filet mignon, just 3 decks apart. The most famous meal on the ship isn't dinner, it is midrats, short for midnight rations. Because the ship runs 24 hours a day, there is a 4th meal served from 2300 to 100. This is the realm of comfort food. It is designed for the night shift, the reactor technicians, the mechanics, the watchstanders who keep the ship alive while the rest of the crew sleeps. The menu is legendary: breakfast burritos, corn dogs, ravioli, leftover pizza. But the king of midrats is the hamster. This is a chicken cordon bleu patty, usually processed breaded chicken filled with ham and cheese, deep fried and served on a hamburger bun. It is terrible for your arteries. It is likely frozen for 6 months before it hits the fryer. but to a tired sailor at midnight, it tastes like a Michelin star meal. It is a cult object, a symbol of the shared misery and comfort of the night watch. There is also bug juice. This is the generic neon-colored fruit punch served in the mess decks. It is rumored among sailors to be excellent for cleaning brass belt buckles, and yes, sailors actually use it for that purpose because the citric acid cuts through tarnish. And we cannot forget the myth of surf and turf. Steak and lobster. When a sailor sees this on the menu, they do not celebrate, they worry. The Navy usually serves steak and lobster for two reasons. One, it is the Navy's birthday or Christmas. Two, the deployment has been extended and the captain is trying to prevent a mutiny. If it is a random Tuesday and you see lobster tails on the line, the rumor mill starts instantly. We aren't going home on time. Something bad happened. The food becomes a barometer for the geopolitical situation. But what happens to the leftovers, the bones, the paper, the plastic? You cannot just throw trash into the ocean. The Navy follows strict environmental laws known as MARPOL. This is where the Waste Management Department comes in. Food waste is pulped into a slurry and discharged only when the ship is far from land. Plastic is the enemy. It cannot be discharged overboard. It must be melted. The ship has massive processors that compress plastic waste into dense hockey puck-like discs. These discs are stored on board in designated trash rooms, sometimes for months until the ship hits port. The smell in the trash storage rooms can be challenging, to say the least. On the new Ford-class carriers, they use a system called PAWDS, Plasma Arc Waste Destruction System. It uses a plasma torch hotter than the surface of the sun to vaporize trash into gas. It is high-tech, but when it breaks, the trash piles up fast, becoming a logistical nightmare of its own. Who washes the dishes? Who peels the potatoes? It is not just the cooks. Every new sailor who reports to the ship, regardless of their actual job, usually spends their first 90 days in the food service division. This is called cranking. You might be a trained electronics technician who graduated top of your class. You might be a highly skilled mechanic. It doesn't matter. For 3 months, you are a crank. You work in the scullery, spraying off thousands of dirty trays in a hot, humid room filled with steam and flying food particles. You mop the floors. You stock the vending machines. It is a rite of passage. It teaches humility. And it motivates you to get promoted so you never have to do it again. But it also creates a bond. Everyone has cranked. Everyone knows the misery of the deep sink. It is the great equalizer of the enlisted ranks. The bakery is a critical component of morale. Bread is difficult to make at sea. Yeast is a living organism and it reacts poorly to the humidity and barometric pressure changes of the ocean. The bakers work the night shift, battling the elements to produce fresh loaves. The smell of baking bread wafting through the ventilation system at 400 is a psychological weapon. It reminds sailors of home. It cuts through the smell of diesel and ozone. The Navy spends $1.8 million a month on food for one ship because food is the only break in the monotony. When you are at sea for 60 days without seeing land, looking at the same gray steel walls, the only color in your life is the food on your tray. Burger Day, usually Wednesdays, helps you track the week. Taco Tuesday is a religious event. Ice cream socials are used to lift spirits after a hard week. If the food is bad, morale tanks. If morale tanks, accidents happen. Planes crash. Reactors get mishandled. The culinary specialists are the first line of defense against depression. A fresh-baked cinnamon roll can save a bad day. The bakers on the night shift, kneading dough while the ship rolls in a storm, are doing it so that a sailor waking up at 600 has something warm to eat before facing another 18-hour shift. The comparison with other navies highlights the unique American approach. The British Royal Navy serves alcohol, the French Navy serves wine and freshly baked baguettes. The U.S. Navy is dry, but the volume of food is unmatched. The sheer caloric intake required to sustain the operational tempo of a U.S. carrier is staggering. A sailor on the flight deck burns 4,000 calories a day dragging chains and fighting the wind. The galley must replace those calories or the sailor fails. It is a biological equation. The logistics of feeding the fleet are a testament to the industrial might of the United States. No other nation can project power this way because no other nation can feed a city in the middle of the ocean for months on end without stopping. So the next time you see an F-18 catapult off the deck of a carrier, do not just think about the pilot. Think about the logistical miracle that put a hot breakfast in his stomach. Think about the supply ship that risked a collision to deliver the eggs. Think about the crank who washed the tray in the scalding heat of the scullery. Think about the baker who stood in front of a 400-degree oven in high seas. The U.S. Navy is the most powerful military force on Earth, not just because of its missiles, but because of its logistics. Napoleon famously said, "An army marches on its stomach." The U.S. Navy swims on its stomach, and that stomach is a nuclear-powered, billion-dollar industrial machine that never sleeps, never stops, and never lets the fire go out. If this deep dive into the industrial gut of the Navy made you hungry for more truth, I need you to do 3 things right now. First, subscribe to the Tactical Chow channel. We don't just look at the guns, we look at the groceries. Second, smash that like button. It helps us afford our own rations. Third, leave a comment below. I want to know, if you had to endure a 9-month deployment, which meal would you miss the most from home? Pizza, a real burger, mom's lasagna? Let me know in the comments. And finally, if you think cooking on a ship is intense, wait until you see the prison economy of the ship's brig. Click the video on your screen right now to see what happens when sailors break the law at sea. It is a brutal reality check. Click it, and I'll see you there. Gemini était en ii. En nmojayete en cher liberté yeri es